I think a lot of us are very unhappy, deeply unhappy, unfulfilled, and it's, again, I think you can point back to ideas, worldviews, what we're taught without even anyone kind of explicitly saying so. The idea is we're basically born to die, and life is just this kind of trip from the maternity ward to the crematorium. And it's about making money. And, it's kind of the basic survival stuff. Like, we've got the survival covered. In fact, we've got it overly covered, so much so that it's probably going to kill us. We're running out of resources, we're running out of water because we've got so good at survival, something's been lost. And the thing that's been lost is the primordial unity. It is that unity which we've become separate from. Now, I don't think that becoming separate in itself was a bad thing. There was a Christian mystic, Jacob Boehme, writing at the end of the 1500s, beginning of the 1600s. He was a simple shoemaker. He was a Lutheran, but essentially he was just a simple shoemaker. And he had his white light experience. He believed, he wrote a book called Aurora, which basically means dawn. And he believed that our consciousness, that we human beings and our consciousness, because remember, you could have brain function, we could survive and probably do all the things we even do without being conscious of it. The consciousness seems to be, there's a philosopher, David Chalmers, who says, how does the sort of water of the brain turn into the wine of consciousness? We don't know. He calls it the hard problem. It's the mysterious thing. So Jacob Boehme, 300-400 years ago, suggested that consciousness is the creator entering its creation in order to perceive itself. So in the same way that we beat our heart, we grow our hair, we, straighten our bones, we work our organs, if you ask us how we do that, we're going to be hard-pressed to explain it. In the same way, I think the Creator does all of these things, creates life out of the primordial soup. I mean, all life came from this mixture of basically water, carbon dioxide, and ammonia. And for some reason, sugars and eventually proteins start forming, and you see the first single-cell organisms that we're descended from. Like, why does that happen? It just happens. There's this, it's kind of like Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, like life finds a way. And how or why is anyone's guess. But according to Jacob Boehme, we are the creator entering its creation in order to perceive it, learn about it, talk about it, perhaps become participants, co-creators ourselves, co-celebrants in it, and start to work to reduce that suffering of others, which is the ultimate, what's the 12th step? It's the last step. That's the most important thing. That in that sense, and we become enthusiastic, which comes from the Greek enthusiasmos, that we become literally engodded ourselves, which has, and I think the only problem with it has this massive responsibility. We play very small and we still pretend everything's kind of automatic and predetermined, even addiction. I mean, we weren't supposed to make it. It was a chronic relapsing brain disease. How do you recover from a chronic relapsing brain disease? You never do. But in AA, they were very clear, we who have recovered. Bill Wilson would recommend, even after the big book was written by him and printed, he would recommend 3 books. One is called Cosmic Consciousness by a Canadian psychiatrist writing around the turn of the last century who had also corresponded with William James, who wrote Varieties of Religious Experience. But he'd had a white light experience. And he wrote this whole book about cosmic consciousness. And Bill Wilson said, this will tell you about my white light experience. And Richard Buck wrote about Jacob Boehme. Jacob Boehme also who the early Quakers studied. Not the later Quakers, but the early Quakers. So when they talk about the divine spark, the light in each of us, that we see in each of us, I mean, that's a very... Jacob Boehme was a student of Paracelsus, the alchemist. I mean, this goes back to ancient Hermetic thought, Greek Hermetic thought. It goes back to Egyptian thought. So these are like ancient practices ancient philosophies. It's been called the perennial philosophy by Aldous Huxley. So Bill Wilson would recommend Cosmic Consciousness, Varieties of Religious Experience, and The Doors of Perception. Those were the 3 books he constantly recommended to everyone. And they're actually, I've read them. They're great books.
Yeah, it's, I think it's a pretty wide open world if we just start to investigate how we can, I think you use the term, show up in it, and be a part of it. And I think that's one of the things I'm so excited about what we're doing, what you're doing, is offering such a bright light and such a different approach to the fact that we can be consciously competent, that we can really use our experiences and use, past experiences to decide how we're going to use them. And we can, there's the carrot and the stick. I mean, there's the sword and the flower, but our lives are a bit of a garden, and I think our consciousness is a bit of a garden. And if we weed it, and if we water it, and if we fertilize it, and if we ask others to come in and help us, that it grows and flourishes, and allows to provide abundance to a lot of other people. We can feed a lot of people with the sunlight of the spirit and our souls if we nurture them. But, I lived with a pretty blackened soul. I did not tend, I did not cultivate, I did not weed my soul for a long time, and it got pretty dark. And I think that's part of what we're doing today. And I'd ask, as we start to wrap up, if there is a sufferer, based on all of the experience you've had, what are the kind of the blocking and tackling recommendations or suggestions, or insights you could give somebody who's in the cave, who's struggling, who's suffering in silence, with some form of whether it's addiction or mental health issue or depression or anxiety. What are the Evan Haines, kind of GPS coordinates to at least make a step to start walking out?
Well, I think the first step is find the others. And I think that the internet gives us, it can be this sort of tool of, I guess, isolation and separation, but it can be also a tool of connection. So if there's, suffering is a very diverse thing. There's so many different forms of suffering, unique experiences of suffering, but they're never entirely unique. So you've been through something that you will find others have been through and that you can connect with. So very first step is find those other people who've been through that stuff.
I love that.
And that's critical, that none of this has to be done alone, and that it is our isolation. That is an old problem. It's at least a few hundred years old, if not a couple of thousand years old. Our sense of isolation. It's not unique. It's not unique to America. We've just kind of perfected it. But it's at the end. And it's at the end, this kind of mental, rational kind of epoch that we're in is falling apart. It's reached its limits of the sort of lone individual, the rational decision maker. So much of life is irrational, and there's feelings, and those feelings are very important. You know how they all say, like, F your feelings, or facts aren't feelings, or I don't know what they say, but that whole thing is over. That consciousness really is about qualia. It's about the felt experience of being alive.
Yeah, I view feelings, I think they say feelings aren't facts, and I view feelings much like driving around without stoplights. They're there for a reason. They're telling you something. They're not to be ignored. It's like, it might be yellow, red, or green. As using the stoplight analogy to make it simple, but they're telling you something. Slow down, speed up, stop. Well,
that's like the David Pierce analogy, that emotional valence, feelings between good and bad and everything in between, are the universe determining like what's good and what's bad. And that must not be taken lightly. And so that's guys like Johann Hari will point to depression and anxiety, that these are powerful signals that are trying to get us back. In the example he uses, that, if you were separated from your tribe, you would have felt anxiety, and the anxiety would have motivated you and driven you to find your people again, and to reconnect with them. So that's where I think we are at.
Yeah.
And so so it's definitely about finding the others, then as well finding a sense of awe and wonder and enthusiasm somewhere. I think whenever possible, going back to the originals, finding the highest quality philosophy, and there are so many different philosophies and mystical traditions and spiritual and religious traditions, and find those and dive in and find the ones that speak to you. But there is a perennial philosophy. There is an ancient kind of, these are messages almost, I look at it like this, that these are messages we're sending to ourselves. If we take the Jacob Boehme idea that we're the creator entering its creation, that we've dropped breadcrumbs for ourselves. Because, only in the sort of mental rational era do we think of time in terms of this arrow that, we were so primitive then and we're so modern now, gosh, we were so dumb, the stuff we used to believe. But no, there is no kind of past, present, and future in that sense, in that there's this single arrow. It's more like we can draw from all of this. We can draw from the past, we can draw from the future. And in that sense, I think we've left, people talk about aliens and time travelers. I think we're visiting ourselves from the future right now, trying to wake ourselves up and tell ourselves something important, like this life is amazing. So find the wonder, find the awe in nature, in something somewhere, that life is so much weirder and more awesome than we think, and that kind of insight is available to anyone, and it's right under our noses. It's not hard.